Welcome, everyone. We'll take just a minute to allow the room to fill. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We really appreciate you being with us today. Welcome. As you join, we have interpretation in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. So you can click the interpretation button and select your room of choice. Remarks will be made in French, Spanish, and English. Okay, I see the room is still filling, but it's 10:01. So I'd like to welcome everyone. My name is Jesse Worker. I'm Director of Climate Governance at the World Resources Institute. We are delighted to have you here with us today to present a report that is launching this week on the transparency, participation, and accountability of different climate finance institutions that are absolutely critical to driving the just and equitable climate action that we need to see. I want to just let everyone know that this is part of a larger body of work that came out of a collaboration with our partners and financial supporters in this work, the World Bank Global Partnership for Social Accountability, as well as Agence Française de Développement. So we're grateful for that support. And this complemented a platform called the Green Accountability Platform that World Resource Institute, South North, and WIRO Commission implemented over the past 2 years in collaboration with 25 civil society organizations in Bangladesh, Brazil, Cameroon, Mexico, and Senegal, who were conducting research, advocacy, convening, to strengthen place-based accountability and transparency and inclusion mechanisms to make climate finance decisions more inclusive for civil society and communities that need it most. So with that, delighted to welcome and invite WRI's President and CEO, Ani Dasgupta, to welcome everyone. Thank you, Ani.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Jesse. First of all, thank you all for being here. This topic is very close to my heart, so I'm very excited to be part of it. Really appreciate all of you for joining. You're in for a treat. We have fantastic panelists coming up just after me. I just want to make two simple points. Climate finance is discussed a lot, and we are very happy that it's discussed a lot because we all know that without finance, this transition, specifically in the emerging economy, just would not happen. So finance is a very important topic, and the financial flows are very important. So I'm glad there is more focus. We don't think there's enough focus. There's more focus than there was before on climate finance. Right now, about $650 billion are spent on climate across the world. And of course, this number has to be growing. As we have seen in the last few years, experts have put together numbers of how much finance we actually need, and it's in trillions of dollars that to get to the transition the world needs, people need, our planet needs. And the demands are the most in global south, where the impacts also are most. So you'll hear about that. But what I think doesn't happen enough, and this is why this particular discussion is so important. When we talk about climate finance, we end up talking about volume, numbers, how much is needed, and how much the gap is, and how much more we need. All very important, very relevant. But we don't talk enough about, I think, about what is that money doing? Even the $650 billion that's being spent today, is it going to the places that need most? Are people who are impacted by climate the most are actually getting access to it, and how they're getting access to it? And that is the system that we have of finance today. Is it transparent? Is it accountable? Is it providing the results we need? So the biggest part of this gathering and the discussion, the report that Jesse will discuss in a minute, is about quantity, of course, is important, but quality of the finance matters as much. And that is what this webinar is about. What do we know about the quality? What can we do about quality? How do we measure it? How do we look at it? And this report looks at all kinds of finance. As we have all discovered, we need all kinds of finance to work together for transition. Domestic capital, both private and public, international capital, both private and public, all kinds of finance is needed. And this report looks at what the system looks at and how actually this finance works for people. And you will see that it's not just about institution and about tracking, but it's about people. Do people have a voice? It is reaching to the communities it wants. You will hear from Mexico, from Senegal, the speakers that you will be introduced in a minute, that what is happening there, and people will trust the transition only if they know the money that is allocated to is going for transition, going to make people's life better. And why is that important, the trust? The trust is important because the transition will not happen if we, the people who are impacted by it, actually don't support the political process that is needed for the transition. Without the political process supporting the transition will not happen, and neither would we have more ambitious policies that we need for the transition. So the key thing that I really like about the report illustrates, the tools, the systems we need for accountability, participation, transparency exist. It's not that we have to invent tools. We just have to figure out how we are practically using them in the right places. And that's what you will hear from. What are we learning from? You'll have panelists from the government, from civil society, from the donor community to give the view of the ecosystem, how that is working. As Jesse said, this work is a part of a very important piece of work that we are part of on green accountability, the green accountability platform that I think was started in 2024 and translated action in Bangladesh, in Cameroon, Mexico, Senegal, Brazil. And that is what we'll see. In Bangladesh, for example, the local government in 12 local government union parishads, they're allocating budget for disaster response and climate adaptation, an outcome of a research led by a partner. Similarly, in Brazil, REDD+ data is now available to communities to see how the data and accessibility data actually can make a difference to financing, deforestation, community participation, etc. You'll hear from Jeff Lack, for example, in Mexico, how climate finance accountability has improved national state levels across different levels. So again, the main message I think we will all hear from practitioners, both from the different parts of the ecosystem, that what can we do and what are we learning about the quality of finance? Because the quality of finance, I assure you, will actually make sure more finance flows into the system if all of us trust that's actually doing what it's supposed to do. Because we absolutely need more finance, but we also want to make sure it goes to the place it wants to. So I'm very excited to hear from my colleagues. And Jesse, I want to congratulate you and the team for the excellent report. Looking forward to the discussion. I give the floor back to you, Jesse.
Thank you so much, Ani. I really appreciate how the focus on how the importance of citizen participation and ensuring that climate finance is actually responding to needs, responding to deficits in trust in terms of overall governance of public finances and collaboration with subnational and national government actors. So I think we're really going to dig into that in the fantastic panel that we have. But now I would like to welcome my colleague, associate with WRI's Climate Finance Program, Molly Caldwell, who is the lead author on this report. Welcome, Molly.
Hi, everyone. Hi, all. Thank you for joining today to learn about the key lessons from our report, the Green Accountability Platform at large, and from our panelists. Our report looked at climate finance through a governance lens. So as Ani and Jesse just mentioned, not just how money moves through the system, but how decisions are made along the way. We focused on 3 key principles of governance, so transparency, participation, accountability, because together these form open governance. And without them, funds can be misallocated, communities can be left out of decisions, and projects can miss local priorities. And when all of that happens, trust really breaks down. But when these principles are strong, finance tends to be more effective, more equitable, and more durable. And we looked across the full climate finance ecosystem. So our report focuses on all the different sources that get talked about. So domestic government budgets, multilateral and bilateral funders, private finance. And we asked 3 questions. Can people see where the money is going? Can stakeholders influence decisions? And can decision makers be held accountable? And what we found is progress, but also some clear gaps. These governance gaps aren't abstract. They affect whether funds reach frontline communities, investments align with national priorities, and whether people trust the institutions managing billions of dollars. And in our interviews with civil society groups, repeatedly, what we heard is it's not just about more money, it's also being able to see where the money is going, being able to shape it, and to ultimately hold it accountable. And the first principle that we focused on was transparency. We found that transparency has improved, especially at the global level. UNFCCC reporting and multilateral development banks have made data more available than ever before. But many countries and institutions it's still surprisingly hard to answer basic questions like who funded this project, why was it chosen, who ultimately benefits, and some forms of finance are more visible than others. So while we have more information, we often still only see part of the picture. In our report, we provide recommendations around improving climate finance data, standardizing definitions and methodologies, a need to cover the full cycle from allocation of funds to expenditure. Did the funds actually get spent, and where they were supposed to? And the need to make data around climate finance more accessible and digestible. And then on the issue of participation, so we focused on civil society, how civil society and communities often get consulted. They often are consulted early during strategy development or late during evaluations. But the actual investment decisions, the moment when projects are selected and money is ultimately allocated, often happens behind closed doors. And that's the moment that matters most. So there's a real gap between consultation and influence. And in our report, we provide recommendations around improving consultation processes, the project life cycle, and including funding for participation in project development. And then the third and final pillar of open governance is accountability. We found that greater accountability is needed within the climate finance system writ large. This is probably the weakest principle. This involves strengthening existing accountability mechanisms and establishing more robust enforcement frameworks. There's a lot of current accountability mechanisms that can be used for things outside of climate finance and are being retooled. But greater effort needs to be made to retool them. And currently, international public and private climate finance specifically lack sufficient enforcement mechanisms. Though we did find that many institutions still have grievance systems or safeguards, but enforcement is inconsistent. And at the international level, especially, there are few consequences when finance is poorly targeted or commitments are met. So even when issues are identified, follow through can be limited. And we provided recommendations around the need for not just answerability and accountability, but more enforceability, expanded grievance mechanisms for institutions that don't have them, and expanding the definition of accountability. So what works? We saw promising practices, countries developing climate budget tagging systems to track spending, multilateral funds, live streaming board meetings, civil society groups translating budget data to community so that communities can better understand it. These examples show that this is a solvable problem, and open governance isn't just a theoretical, it's practical, and it's already happening. And so some framing to keep in mind for today's conversation, and that brings us to today's panel, because each of our speakers represents a critical part of the system. From the donor perspective, how do you balance speed and flexibility with transparency and accountability? From the government perspective, how do you build systems that track climate finance and enable meaningful participation? And from the civil society perspective, what does genuine influence look like, and where are the biggest barriers? So if there's one key takeaway from this report, it's this: climate finance works best when decisions are visible, inclusive, and accountable. So today, I hope we can move beyond just talking about quantity and talk about how well climate finance is governed. Thank you, and looking forward to our panel. So back to you, Jesse.
Thank you, Molly. I highly recommend folks to take a look at the report, which will be published this week and which you will receive in the follow-up to this webinar, along with an article, because I think it really bridges what is happening at the country level in terms of the availability of information, the opportunity for citizens to participate, as Molly said. There are different stages of those opportunities to participate, and critically at the project level decisions, we see that there's far less likelihood of civil society to be able to influence that stage. But it also looks at from a range of different sources: multilateral, bilateral, and private finance. And sometimes those can be, in terms of the accountability and governance, can be lumped together, but it really disaggregates what, at least on paper, those opportunities for engagement are. And we think there's a huge opportunity to really drill down with this at the country level to understand what stakeholders are actually experiencing when it comes to being able to influence the transparency of those funds and the impact that they're having. So now I would like to welcome a fantastic panel here to really share how the report's findings resonate in their work. So we have with us today, first of all, Céline Bernadat, who is the head of the Citizens and Institutions Unit at Agence Française de Développement. You heard me say at the outset that AFD was the supporter for this research paper, so we really appreciate their support, and they have been deeply involved in strengthening governance and around climate change and the just transition. And in Celine's role, she really straddles at the heart of both governance and citizen involvement, open government, as Molly talked about, and just transition and climate action. We have Dr. Yakia Badiane, who is the Environment and Climate Advisor for the Ministry of Energy, Petroleum, and Mines in Senegal. I'm sure, as you're aware, Senegal was one of the first 3 countries to launch its Just Energy Transition Platform in 2024. And Dr. Badiane's ministry is at the heart of that transition, especially given the discoveries of natural gas offshore in Senegal, and their commitment to ensuring renewable energy diversification by 2030. Dr. Badiane, in his role, is the lead on involving civil society in that Just Energy Transition Partnership. And we're delighted to have him on here because I think Senegal, given the vibrancy of civil society in Senegal and the government's commitment to working with those communities, can really share some lessons that can be translated across to different countries as well. And finally, we have been thrilled to work with HEFLAC over the course of these past few years on the Green Accountability Platform, and delighted to welcome Lorena Caballero, who is the technical director. If you don't know HEFLAC's work, I'm not sure how you're in a climate finance webinar if you don't know who HEFLAC is, but they are a regional leader on making climate finance transparent, providing methodologies, working with civil society and governments at the international, national, and regional level to help civil society engage more effectively in understanding where climate finance flows go when they hit the country, and how different forms of finance are supporting or thwarting climate action that we need to have happen. So welcome to my panel. And I will start first with a question for Céline. Céline, as I said in the intro, your role spans civil society, governance, and climate finance for a just transition. You work across multiple countries with diverse institutions. What are you looking for in effective citizen engagement in climate finance decisions to ensure that AFD's support is enabling inclusive climate action?
Many thanks, Jesse, and good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to participate to this session. Thanks for the question. For AFD, we are convinced that climate transition cannot be efficient if it's not considering how to strengthen the bond of trust between citizens and institutions. It means that transparency, it's just as an impact if information is accessible, it's understandable and usable. A solid accountability is really necessary for monitoring public spending and the credibility of climate action. It means transparency and also public participation that is really representative and diverse. To our mind, citizens' participation improves the relevance, acceptability, and sustainability of climate policies because it can provide different point of view and improve the public policy with really local considerations and of course the day-to-day considerations of the citizens. Institutions must be equipped to engage in the dialogue with citizens, not just report back to them. It's one step, but it's not enough. It means a participation that is also adapted to local, to political, social, and institutional contexts, beyond also the diversity of the participants. Also, we consider that, of course, civil society is a key partner in implementation and innovation that can bring a lot to bring really added value to the public policy and also the decision on the financial flows that we mentioned before. Quality governance is a long-term investment in just transition. It's a strong governance of the institutions, and they are stronger if they are linked with the citizens. Democratic innovations also are strengthening the resilience of public policies in the context of crisis. It means that, yes, with the context of polycrisis being really related to local considerations, to the citizens' opinions, and of course, representativity is key. As you mentioned, at AFD, we support substantive democracy based on effective institutions and active citizenship. We had made really an engagement in AFD Group has made a democratic and inclusive governments as a cross-cutting ambition of our action. For all of our projects. In 2025, we have presented a dedicated roadmap, Citizens, Institutions, Democracy, that was adapted to translate this ambition into concrete commitments with objectives to strengthen wherever we operate the relationship between citizens and institutions, meaning for climate, for energy, for health, for any sector, because we feel that it will strengthen the public policy and the public action, and it will be more appropriate and also credible. Last year, for instance, we committed more than 5 billion across more than 200 projects for reflecting our involvement to support public policies, reinforcing institutions, fostering citizen participation, and protecting fundamental rights. So this is a way to reaffirm our conviction that we cannot reach the sustainable and shared development without effective, accountable institutions and without an active and recognized relationship with citizens. Happy to discuss further. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Celine. I'm really excited to hear about that roadmap. I really appreciate how you mentioned that it cuts across sectors. I think that's so critical, especially we are now in the era of country platforms that is bringing together all of these sectors around aligning different finance sources for domestic priorities. So ensuring that those governance institutions are applicable and strengthened across those different sectors would love to see if AFD is if we can share that perhaps in the chat. But thank you for those remarks. Shifting to Lorena. Lorena, I am at the benefit of knowing a little bit more about of course about your work, and I know, for instance, how impactful the Sustainable Climate Finance Index is. So I would like others to know about it too. I would say it's one of the most widely regarded civil society developed tools across Latin America and the Caribbean, although I know that HEFLAC is maybe reaching beyond the LAC region, to assess how governments are mobilizing and using finance in ways that impact climate mitigation and adaptation. Can you briefly describe what the need was that HEFLAC was responding to in creating the index, and in simple terms, what it measures and what kind of impact you are seeing it have so far?
Gracias, Jessy. Es un placer estar aquí platicando con ustedes. La generación del índice surge principalmente de esta necesidad de contar con una agenda de transparencia que acompañe una agenda climática. Una agenda de transparencia es, como bien lo mencionaron en los hallazgos del estudio, lo que va a permitir identificar si lo que se pone en las planeaciones, en los objetivos climáticos, en la realidad está obteniendo los recursos necesarios para materializarse. Eh, Nos gusta decir, donde pones tus recursos, estás poniendo tus prioridades, ¿no? Entonces, para poder identificar si la agenda climática es una prioridad en un país, en una región, lo primero que tenemos que identificar es dónde está tu dinero. Como sabemos, una de las principales o uno de los motores que financian la agenda climática siempre van a ser los recursos domésticos, los recursos a nivel país. Entonces es muy importante poder identificar dónde está ese dinero. Y creo que durante mucho tiempo en varios países, en varias regiones, eso quedaba en el aire, ¿no? No poder tener una metodología homologada de hacia dónde estamos destinando los recursos y cómo están estos flujos impactando o no en el logro de los objetivos climáticos. Entonces, de ahí surge esta necesidad de como desde la sociedad civil, poder tomar las riendas y empezar a presentar propuestas, como lo es el índice, para identificar dónde está ese dinero y qué estamos haciendo con él. Y si eventualmente esa distribución de los recursos nos está acercando o nos está alejando de nuestros objetivos en materia de financiamiento climático. Esa es la primera razón por la que surge la necesidad de crear un índice como este. Evidentemente, la primera idea y la primera versión del índice fue a nivel regional, debido a que como región en Latinoamérica y en el Caribe compartimos muchas similitudes, ¿no? Compartimos muchas similitudes y problemáticas. Entonces, el primer acercamiento a la aplicación de esta metodología fue a nivel regional para empezar a comparar cómo es que están distribuidos esos presupuestos y por qué tal vez algunos países, independientemente de sus condiciones económicas, estaban avanzando de mejor o de peor forma en el logro de sus objetivos climáticos. A partir de ahí, te encuentras con muchos descubrimientos, que es que no toda la información está disponible y que no hay una forma única de reportar esa información en el gasto climático. Y de ahí surge esta metodología en la que desde la sociedad civil presentamos una propuesta para poder cuantificar cómo se está gastando este dinero al interior de los países, ¿no? Básicamente, enfocándonos en 4 variables muy básicas, que es cuánto dinero yo estoy gastando en actividades que me acercan a mis objetivos climáticos, cuánto dinero yo estoy gastando en actividades que me alejan, es decir, en actividades intensivas en carbono o este tipo de actividades que nos van a alejar de nuestros objetivos climáticos, y lo mismo del lado del ingreso. Qué tanto estoy gastando y qué tanto estoy recibiendo por quererme acercar al logro de mis objetivos en materia climática. ¿Qué impacto hemos tenido? Evidentemente, creo que uno de los primeros impactos es puntualizar que no es trivial encontrar esta información y que tampoco existe una manera única, ni dentro de un país ni alrededor de la región, de poder reportar estos flujos de recursos. Lo que nos pone en una situación de que tenemos que empezar a hablar el mismo lenguaje para poder empezar a lograr los objetivos comunes, ¿no? Ese fue uno de los primeros impactos que ha tenido y uno de los primeros hallazgos, porque al presentarlo ya con contrapartes gubernamentales, justamente es una de las cosas que empiezan a tomar la discusión. ¿Cómo le hacemos para hablar el mismo lenguaje? ¿Cómo le hacemos para que tú realmente reportes como un presupuesto en materia climática, actividades que realmente van a impactar en el logro de los objetivos? ¿Cómo le hacemos para que empecemos a quitar este tipo de reportes que lo único que están haciendo es maquillar de cierta forma las cifras para parecer que estamos destinando los recursos que se necesitan, siendo que si te pones a investigar más y a buscar mejor en el presupuesto, no necesariamente todo lo que reportan los países podríamos considerarlo como financiamiento para temas climáticos. Entonces, creo que el impacto principal en el que yo podría resumir la creación del índice a nivel regional y posteriormente la aplicación que hemos hecho en países como México y Brasil es poder poner sobre la mesa la discusión de en el papel, estos son tus objetivos. En la realidad, tu presupuesto y lo que estás destinando para ese logro es esto. Y a partir de ahí abrimos puntualización de si realmente incluso eso que tú estás reportando está significando un cambio o solamente lo estamos haciendo para dar la impresión de que sí queremos avanzar en estos objetivos cuando realmente detrás todavía falta un compromiso mayor de alinear el presupuesto con la planeación. Eh, Aquí lo dejaría, ¿sí?
Thank you, Lorena. I think that really helps to understand what the how the Sustainable Finance Index is a tool that is really helping civil society work more effectively with governments to establish, I think, a baseline of understanding of where the climate finance flows are coming from and where they're actually going, and how other finance flows perhaps are undermining in some cases the climate policy ambition. I know from doing this work that there are many civil society organizations that are coming into the climate finance space. Perhaps they've worked on other related environmental issues, or perhaps they've worked around advocating for communities. And they are looking for tools like this to be able to understand the climate finance landscape, the sources, where they flow through, how they make it to local budgets. So I think that this tool has potentially tremendous impact beyond the region where you work. Dr. Bajan, thrilled to have you here. Senegal's just energy transition was formally signed in 2023 and sets a target of 40% renewable energy production by 2030. Late last year, you launched your Just Energy Transition Plan investment plan. So congratulations. And I would like to hear, how did the Ministry of Energy, Petroleum and Mines work to build awareness and trust with citizens in the development of that plan? And what role will they play, them, meaning citizens or communities, what role will they play in its implementation? Thank you.
Merci, Jesse, pour cette introduction. Bonjour à tous. Alors, c'est une question qui est très importante, hein, mais auquel il n'est pas difficile donc de répondre parce que, disons, la sensibilisation de la population, hein, est passée, disons, par la société civile, hein, qui a été le relais. Et la communication et la sensibilisation, surtout des populations, n'a pas été très difficile, puisque l'État, en réalité, a surtout communiqué sur les différents programmes qu'il avait, à savoir l'accès universel à une énergie durable et à moindre coût. Et dans ce contexte, le partenariat pour une transition énergétique juste a été juste un levier ou bien un moyen pour atteindre ces différents objectifs. Et pour dire également que ces objectifs étaient partagés par tout le monde, hein, parce que les principaux bénéficiaires, ce sont les communautés, puisque il fallait résorber le gap qu'il y a entre le monde rural et le monde urbain. Et là, du coup, tout le monde s'est accordé autour de de ces objectifs-là. Donc, c'est la raison pour laquelle ça n'a pas été difficile. Alors, ce qu'il faut rappeler aussi par rapport au JETP, c'est que la société civile même a été associée dans les négociations. On n'a pas attendu la fin des négociations pour inviter la société civile et les citoyens, mais on les a intégrés dans même le processus de négociation et pas mal d'organisations de société civile ont assisté aux négociations et ont donné déjà le point de vue à partir des négociations même. Et lorsque le partenariat a été signé, maintenant, il fallait passer à la phase de mise en œuvre. Et toujours dans cette même logique d'associer les populations et la société civile. On a assigné les rôles que nous avons assignés à la société civile, ce sont les rôles hein, que la société civile a toujours joué, hein, à savoir déjà dans la réflexion, parce que nous avons une société civile qui est très productive en termes de réflexion intellectuelle et dans les orientations. Donc ça, c'est un rôle qui a été essentiel aussi bien dans les négociations disons, dans la gouvernance même du JETP. Ce qu'il faut rappeler aussi, c'est de dire que il y a un groupe de travail même qui a été confié à la société civile, c'est le groupe de travail équité sociale. Et dans ce groupe de travail-là, la société civile a eu à donner ses propres orientations et comment elle voit, disons, la gouvernance et le processus même d'implémentation du JETP. Et justement, ce sont ces orientations-là qui ont été utilisées dans l'élaboration même du plan d'investissement du JETP. Un autre rôle que la société civile est en train de jouer, c'est la veille, puisque la société civile veille à ce que la transparence et la redevabilité puissent être quelque chose de concret, qu'on ne discute pas. Parce que tout simplement, autant les différentes parties sont là, il y a le gouvernement, il y a les partenaires techniques et financiers, mais aussi il y a les autres acteurs. Donc, il faudrait que à tous les niveaux, que ça soit que la transparence puisse être, disons, le principe de base. Et sur ça, la société civile joue un rôle très important en rappelant à chaque partie voilà, le rôle et les engagements qui avaient été pris. Ensuite, le dernier rôle hein, que nous voyons, c'est la mobilisation des acteurs communautaires. Et sur ça, vraiment, nous avons vu avec la mise en place d'une plateforme de la société civile pour une transition énergétique juste, voilà, qui vont au fin fond des pays, en tout cas en milieu rural, pour poser le débat sur l'équité, sur le processus, etc., etc. Et là, vraiment, l'État ne peut pas être partout. Donc, la société civile constitue un partenaire privilégié pour relayer en tout cas l'information auprès des populations. Et évidemment, notre collaboration avec les communautés via la société civile, bon, c'est une collaboration très franche, hein, chacun connaît son rôle. Et c'est pas parce qu'on s'entend bien que voilà que l'État ne jouera pas son rôle ou la société civile ne jouera pas son rôle. Chacun va jouer son rôle, le rôle qui est le leur. Donc, mais en veillant à une bonne collaboration pour que voilà les choses puissent bien se passer. Il va y avoir aussi des défis. Hein. Je ne sais pas s'il y aura un autre tour de table hein, pour qu'on en parle. Mais pour l'instant, je vais m'en arrêter là et reste à votre disposition. Merci.
Thank you so much, Yakia. I think we will definitely come back to you to hear more about how that investment of time and resources from the ministry's perspective in building trust pays dividends down the road. So returning to Lorena, Lorena, once you have that analysis of climate finance flows in your country, what have you found enables constructive policy dialogues or other actions based on that analysis that you provided? So do you ever find that the analysis is not enough of an incentive alone for decision makers to take action? And if that is the case in some of the countries where you work, what are you finding is effective in bringing stakeholders together to advance climate transparency and accountability?
Gracias, Jessy. Por sí solos los datos nunca van a lograr movilizar ni cambiar las políticas públicas, ¿no? Los datos exhiben, y este ejercicio que hacemos de búsqueda y de sistematización de la información exhiben eso, dónde estamos hoy en temas de financiamiento y exhiben un poco a veces esta incongruencia entre la planeación y la presupuestación. Pero creo que este siguiente paso de abrir la discusión y realmente tener una interlocución con los tomadores de decisiones viene un poco de también poder esa información técnica que muchas veces ellos conocen, traducirla justamente en cuáles son estos beneficios sociales, cuáles son estos beneficios que podemos obtener no solo desde la ciudadanía, sino desde el mismo gobierno, para lograr objetivos no solo climáticos, sino más ambiciosos, ¿no? Ejemplo, el caso de una agenda de transparencia y de gobierno abierto, como tal, no solo te impulsa el logro de los objetivos en materia de financiamiento climático, te impulsa muchas de las agendas que traemos en sociedad civil y muchas de las agendas que también el gobierno plantea como prioritarias, ¿no? Creo que lo que abre la discusión es poder traducir estos datos en formas de modificar las decisiones que estamos tomando y exhibir los beneficios. Muchas veces en el tema de presupuesto público en particular, alrededor de todos los países existe una inercia en la ejecución del gasto. Es decir, estamos acostumbrados a que se gaste como se ha venido gastando, ya sea por una falta de capacidades dentro del servicio público, ya sea por falta de prioridad en los temas que queremos impulsar, en este caso la agenda climática. Pero la realidad es que es muy difícil hacer esos cambios, por ejemplo, de un ejercicio fiscal a otro para poder movilizar recursos de mejor manera. Entonces, creo que lo que cambia y lo que nos permite tener una mejor interlocución y un impacto más directo con ellos es poder exhibir estos datos en un contexto. ¿Qué va a pasar después si seguimos haciéndolo de esta forma? Más allá de lograr o no los objetivos que tenemos en materia climática. ¿Qué va a pasar después en materia de credibilidad? Como lo comentaban anteriormente. Creo que es muy importante poder exhibir congruencia entre lo que tú planeas o lo que tú promueves como tu prioridad en política pública contra lo que en realidad está sucediendo, ¿no? Entonces, poder ofrecer desde la sociedad civil una forma en la que se encuentren alternativas que tal vez no sean tan agresivas o disruptivas a lo que se viene haciendo, es una de las maneras en las que podemos aproximar este diálogo. Otra ventaja que tenemos es que también por las condiciones en las que se da a veces la política pública en la región, es difícil que se llegue a este nivel de profundidad dentro de las investigaciones al interior de los gobiernos. Entonces, ofrecer este apoyo técnico también resulta valioso y también resulta una forma de poder abrirnos la puerta para poder generar incidencia con ellos, ¿no? Poder ofrecer este trabajo y este expertise técnico que se tiene desde sociedad civil, que se ha construido de forma autónoma, para poder ponerlo a su disposición, ya sea para que ellos generen mayores capacidades o para solventar esos huecos en los que ellos no pueden hacer este tipo de investigaciones que puedan venir desde sociedad civil y que ellos lo internalicen, ¿no? Creo que esas serían dos formas muy importantes y sobre todo que en la práctica han resultado para poder acercarnos a los tomadores de decisiones y para que puedan entender que lo que se está exhibiendo en un ejercicio como el índice es más una herramienta para ellos de poder identificar dónde están esas áreas de oportunidad, más que un ejercicio de exhibir cuáles son las faltas o cuáles son los problemas que se tienen en la redistribución del presupuesto, ¿no? Eh, Creo que es muy importante también de parte de sociedad civil, ya con otros actores de la misma sociedad, es poder socializar el conocimiento. Creo que esa es otra de las formas en las que podemos abrir la discusión y que tenga mucho más impacto, porque muchas veces también estas discusiones técnicas se vuelven tan complejas que tú no las puedes traducir en cómo en tu vida real impacta en otras agendas o en las mismas agendas climáticas, ¿no? La parte presupuestaria puede volverse muy compleja para poder entrar a esas discusiones desde distintos tipos de sociedad civil. Entonces, creo que otro de los impactos y otra de las ventajas que tiene una herramienta como esta es poder traducir esa información técnica en un lenguaje cotidiano y empezar a crear esta corresponsabilidad entre gobierno y sociedad de que todos necesitamos hablar el mismo idioma para poder lograr esos objetivos, ¿no? Y no quedarnos en nuestros mismos círculos donde compartimos las mismas ideas y los mismos objetivos y poder llegar a esos tomadores de decisiones que al final van a ser quienes hagan la diferencia. Creo que esas serían básicamente las formas en las que nosotros hemos logrado generar incidencia, generar relaciones con gobierno que nos permitan que sean escuchadas nuestras propuestas y también que a partir de eso nosotros podamos apoyar y escuchar cuáles son las problemáticas con las que los gobiernos se enfrentan para poder redirigir estos flujos o hacer propuestas innovadoras en materia de política pública.
Thank you, Lorena. Shifting to Celine. Celine, you spoke in your response about the importance of this capacity building to enable citizens to effectively participate in climate action, the role of governance and institutions, how it's really at the heart of driving this effective climate action. From working in this space, obviously, we've seen over the last 10 years an explosion of interest around climate assemblies. They address or they seek to address, when well designed, the issues of representation that you brought up in your remarks, because we all know anyone involved in doing public participation knows that if you don't intentionally try to address that, then you're very likely going to have a self-selected group of better resourced or groups or organizations that have closer connections to people of power, better access to information, and so forth. So these assemblies show a lot of promise, and there's now peer-reviewed papers, and there's knowledge networks and so forth. I'm curious, in the work that you do with country partners, are there other forms of citizen engagement or follow-through? Because obviously France has its own, being one of the very first experimenters with citizen assemblies. There's always the follow-through in the implementation. What do you see as promising forms of platforms, mechanisms of civil society and a diverse representation of civil society to be part of the implementation and oversight? Because we have seen it so many times. The commitments, people get excited, but then the implementation is lacking, and the trust then almost collapses in the process. So what do you see as promising, and how does AFD work to support citizens across that policy implementation process?
Okay, many thanks, and difficult question because it can apply to many types of public action. Indeed, you mentioned climate assemblies, which are more and more developed in many countries. It's really, for instance, before the Conference of Parties in Brazil, there have been some citizen assemblies locally, which could also bring some information to the public authorities in order to also adjust some policies. But what is important is, of course, to present the information in the most understandable way, and also inform after the citizens on what have we done with the content of the discussions. Some specific points could not be taken into account because this, and some other points could have been precised because of the contributions. So this is essential. Even if it's not taken into account, this is important to explain why. I think that it's part of the trust. And where we are operating, it's not only about big public policies, strategies, it's also on projects, even small projects, small actions locally. Even, for instance, let's say there is a small infrastructure, what could be done to also consult people locally, to consult citizens for any type of action, because we really think that democratic practices could be done at with every type of action. It could be big, important public program, but also small local actions, which is part also, for instance, climate adaptation specifically. It's taking into account local considerations, which are key. And then on that, it's on programs of investment, but also one investment or big programs with public policies. So this is what we try to do in our day-to-day action. It's with any type of project that we have. We think that the consultation of citizens is applicable and could bring some value, and that is important to be really to pay attention on all over the cycle. It means the information that is provided, the profile of the citizens that are consulted, and then what is done with their contribution, what is rejected and why, and how we follow up on the transparency and the consequences and the impact of the public actions. This is all over the cycle. That's what we try.
Thank you, Celine. I really appreciated the detail and thoughtfulness in the response. I mean, showing how you're thinking through and what makes it meaningful. We hear what meaningful, not checkbox participation. And I think that really gives some very tangible examples. So shifting back to Yakia for our final question. So Dr. Rajan, we hear that we know that engaging citizens, meaningfully in the ways that Celine was describing, does take additional time and resources, and it also requires trust building. Some of our partners in Senegal spoke to that. While Senegal has, I would say, it has certainly a better culture of government agencies engaging with citizens, as you spoke to, than other countries. It is a place where perhaps democracy is really flourishing. Still, there can be trust deficits, right, with communities, with industry, and with government. So can you just describe what are the good practices that you have seen put in place in Senegal's JETP that really sought to have honest conversations with different types of communities facing different challenges or with different interests, and how you really are witnessing perhaps what is enabling that trust to be built, and why is that? Do you think why is that such a why do you see that as being perhaps important in the durability or the longevity of the impact of Senegal's transition plan? So yeah, just a question about trust building because everyone talks about it, but what how are you finding what are maybe lessons that countries who are earlier on in their journey on country platforms can take from Senegal's experience?
Merci, Jesse. Je vais commencer par le dernier aspect de votre question sur la confiance, hein. Parce que vous savez, les rapports n'ont pas toujours été faciles, hein. Mais que ça soit le gouvernement, que ça soit la société civile, donc, se sont rendus à l'évidence pour savoir que, avec le recul, l'objectif, c'est la même chose. Alors, c'est la raison pour laquelle ça a facilité les choses, hein, et dans le cadre précis de la transition énergétique. La petite histoire, c'est que c'est la société civile même qui s'est constituée en une plateforme et est venue vers l'État. Alors que l'État était en train de se préparer pour voir les mécanismes pour intégrer la société civile dans le processus. Donc, ça a été une convergence de vues entre les deux parties et ça a été vraiment une très bonne chose. Maintenant, pour pérenniser tout cela, je pense que l'État, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, hein, a responsabilisé la société civile pour lui permettre d'apporter, disons, son savoir-faire, d'apporter également ses orientations, mais aussi d'exposer ses craintes. Moi, je pense que la base de tout cela, c'est l'écoute. Il faudrait que les décideurs puissent rester à l'écoute de la société civile, ce qu'elles ont à dire, etc., et de les analyser. Et la première chose, une fois vous le faites, vous allez vous rendre compte que, en réalité, nous avons les mêmes objectifs, mais en des paroles tout simplement différentes. Et le conseil que je vais donner aux autres pays, c'est de s'ouvrir et de donner confiance. S'ouvrir, écouter ce que les gens ont à dire et ne pas dire systématiquement, oh, c'est la société civile et les cataloguer quelque part. Certes, tout n'est pas rond, hein, parce que il faut le dire, hein, la société civile est très diversifiée, avec des agendas et des tons qui sont très différents, mais aux décideurs de concilier tout cela et de prendre le meilleur de chacun pour atteindre les objectifs communs qui sont assignés. Et en termes de défis aussi, hein, si je reviens sur cette question-là, c'est, disons, la barrière linguistique que nous avons, en tout cas au Sénégal, parce que rien que pour traduire transition énergétique dans notre langue nationale, c'est la croix et la bannière. Donc, c'est très difficile. Alors, tout- tous les rapports sont écrits en français, etc. Donc, là, c'est un véritable défi auquel l'État, la société civile et tous les acteurs sont confrontés. Parce que le contrôle citoyen, il faudrait que les citoyens puissent être à même de comprendre déjà ce qui se trouve dans les rapports, voilà, les interpréter et de juger de leur efficacité ou non. Sinon, ça va être très difficile. Et si nous revenons dans le cadre société civile formelle, là aussi, il y a beaucoup de défis, hein, que nous avons notés, mais qui, quand même, ils sont en train de travailler là-dessus, mais je pense que le renforcement de capacité, comme l'a dit tout à l'heure mes prédécesseurs, hein, c'est un élément qui est très important. Il faudrait que la société civile puisse également se mettre à niveau pour mieux comprendre les enjeux, pour mieux interpréter et pour mieux être, disons, une force de proposition. Heureusement, le Sénégal, quand même, il faut le reconnaître, une bonne partie de la société civile est dans cette dimension-là, mais je pense que c'est une piste d'amélioration à faire pour nous tous. Et là, l'État a un rôle à jouer, mais également les autres parties prenantes ont un rôle à jouer. Pour l'instant, je pense que la collaboration, en tout cas, se passe très bien. puisque même dans le plan d'investissement, quand vous le lisez, vous allez sentir cette dimension sociale-là qui forcément n'est pas la préoccupation des décideurs. Donc, si vous trouvez ces axes-là dans ces plans d'investissement, c'est la touche de la société civile qui s'est battue pour que les préoccupations des citoyens puissent être largement prises en charge dans le plan d'investissement. Alors, je pense que c'est une bonne collaboration, un bon modèle à montrer pour dire aux décideurs des autres pays, hein, il ne faudrait pas avoir peur de cette confrontation parce que c'est une confrontation d'idées. Donc, il faut vous ouvrir et poser le débat. Voilà, je pense que la bonne conscience est la chose la mieux partagée dans le monde. Donc, il faudrait que les gens s'écoutent pour pouvoir construire ensemble dans cette dynamique-là. Merci beaucoup.
I really appreciate those final remarks, Yakia, about welcoming confrontation and building trust through that, having those difficult conversations. I want to thank all the panelists for their remarks. We'll have 10 minutes of just under 10 minutes for a few questions. I want to focus on the questions for our panelists and would encourage WRI colleagues to respond to questions that we can respond to in the Q&A. You'll see the Q&A if you haven't used it already. So we have a question for Lorena. Lorena, this is coming from Sasa Emmanuel James. I hope he or she is still with us. I was quite impressed that Argentina has a much higher index than Brazil and other countries in the region, considering all the backlog in Argentina's climate policies. How do you explain this? Is it private finance or because the data is from 2024? Thanks.
Bueno, como les había comentado, el cálculo del índice nos refiere a 4 variables fundamentales, ¿no? Que son ingresos intensivos en carbono, ingresos sostenibles, presupuestos intensivos en carbono y presupuestos sostenibles. Sin entrar mucho a los números, una de las principales razones es que si bien Brasil ha avanzado mucho en temas climáticos, sigue siendo una economía que destina una importante cantidad de presupuesto a actividades intensivas en carbono. Entonces, esto es una de los principales variables que mueve el indicador, ¿no? Adicionalmente, y es donde pareciera que surgen estas grandes preguntas, Argentina recibe ingresos por fuentes climáticas, por el cuidado a sus áreas naturales protegidas y por otros diversos rubros de ingreso, lo que hace que en el conjunto Argentina está reportando una mayor intensidad en actividades climáticas que en actividades intensivas en carbono, ¿no? Entonces, esta sería de manera muy general la razón por la que un país que podamos decir estás viendo que su política va en contra de los objetivos climáticos ya en la práctica, cuando estás viendo el dinero, dónde está localizado, pues resulta que no es tan así y es un poco lo que platicábamos al principio. Creo que lo que nos da el índice es un poco más de detalle, más allá del discurso, más allá de decir sí estoy haciendo o no estoy haciendo, es en realidad tu dinero a qué lo estás destinando, porque ahí está tu prioridad. Entonces, en casos como Brasil, que va muy adelantado en ciertos objetivos climáticos, el tema del presupuesto todavía sigue destinando a actividades intensivas en carbono, porque evidentemente tiene una petrolera estatal importante y porque históricamente su economía también había sido pues fuertemente anclada a la producción de combustibles fósiles, ¿no? Entonces, esta sería una respuesta rápida, pero justamente los invitaría a revisar el índice y creo que vamos a encontrar algunas de estas resultados muy interesantes de aquellos países que en la política pública dicen estar haciendo una cosa, mientras que ya en su presupuesto tal vez el destino del recurso no está necesariamente localizado donde debería.
Thank you so much, Lorena. I'm scanning the questions, and while I do not see any others that are specifically addressed at any of our panelists, I'm relying on my colleagues to make me aware if I've overlooked something. I do see a question though that I think that perhaps Celine or Yakia may have thoughts on, which is and I think we would as well, which is how do you ensure, this is from Miguel Schloss, thank you, Miguel. How do you ensure that experiences in different countries are properly incorporated in the design and execution of energy transition and associated projects, including public consultation processes, in terms of their impact, costs, organizational arrangements to ensure proper action at individual country and local levels? So I think that maybe can be interpreted in a few different ways. Perhaps how do past efforts to align different actors around major domestic priorities that have high levels of impact across society and may have disproportionate impacts, or perhaps also how do we learn from different countries' experiences? I think we know that governance processes do not import well. You can't cut and paste how one country engaged its public and expect another country to do exactly the same thing. The set of actors and institutions varies across country. You have to understand that political context. But I would love to hear, would either Celine or Yakia Bajan care to reflect on that question in terms of how you're seeing that role of learning both from past processes or from similar analogous, perhaps countries that have tried to, bring together an effective platform around financing for the energy transition. So I'll stop and see who might like to say a word to that. Celine, are you nodding to jump in? Please do.
Many thanks. Well, yes, on our side, we are trying to indeed I'm sorry, I have the interpretation also. We are really capitalizing on the experience that we have in several countries. Indeed, as we are working in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and Eastern Europe, we are trying also to define some methodologies, using the feedback of different experience, including, for instance, on the JETP programs, the energy that we have in many countries. We have several programs, for instance, in Indonesia, in Senegal, of course. We are working also in Latin America, in Mexico. On our, yes, the key is also to work on the co-construction with local partners, not applying something that is really copy-paste. Of course, it's really very different from one country to another, but at least some methodologies. So the co-construction, a relationship with our counterparts, consulting all the stakeholders that would be relevant to consult for the specific policy, that is key. So this is what we apply in general, some methodologies capitalizing between the countries, but I will let my colleague complete, of course.
Thank you, Celine. Yakia, did you want to add anything additional?
Oui, hein, je souscris à 100% hein, aux paroles de Céline. C'est exactement ça. Hein. Il y a pas un modèle, disons, reproductible à souhait, mais quand même, les modèles vont servir de base de travail. Pour notre exemple, nous avons beaucoup étudié le cas de l'Afrique du Sud, hein, la gouvernance de l'Afrique du Sud, de l'Indonésie, du Vietnam, et nous avons mis sur la table, nous avons beaucoup étudié et voir qu'est-ce qui pourrait marcher au Sénégal et qu'est-ce qui ne pourrait pas marcher au Sénégal. Et on a pris toutes les bonnes choses qui peuvent marcher au Sénégal, on a adapté et on a rajouté maintenant voilà, le contexte sénégalais et ça semble marcher jusque-là. Mais pour dire simplement, la première chose à faire, c'est que les décideurs soient conscients que la société civile est un partenaire déjà. Et pour cela, c'est pas, ça vient pas comme ça, hein. Moi, je me rappelle bien, lorsque nous venions de commencer au ministère, c'était un conglomérat de techniciens, d'ingénieurs, etc. Il y avait pas beaucoup de travailleurs spécialisés dans les sciences sociales, etc. Et c'est à partir du moment où on a commencé à avoir ce personnel-là, et ce personnel a commencé à imposer ce dialogue-là, à l'instaurer. Moi, je pense que la première chose à faire dans les autres pays, si dans leur sphère de décision technique comme les ministères de l'énergie, des mines, etc. C'est pas simplement une question d'ingénieur ou de technicien, c'est aussi une question de sciences sociales parce que c'est une science qui s'apprend. Parce que l'ingénieur, ce qu'il a en tête, c'est, voilà, il fonce devant ses objectifs, que ses machines tournent, etc. La dimension humaine est souvent reléguée au second plan. Moi, je pense qu'au Sénégal, c'est ce que nous avons réussi à faire en faisant une approche pluridisciplinaire pour faire marcher les choses. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Yakid. Thank you so much again to our panelists for sharing your expertise and your experiences. I think we've all benefited from that. And now I would like to welcome our collaborator, our supporter who's made this work possible, Ali Rahim, Program Manager for the Global Partnership for Social Accountability at the World Bank, as well as the Civil Society and Social Innovation Initiative Alliance, sorry. Ali has been a fantastic collaborator, supporter, and friend throughout this process. So Ali, please, I know you see all of these synergies coming together and what this all means for civil society architecture. Over to you. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Jesse, and thanks for your collaboration. I think it's been so exciting over the last 3 years to see this community come together in this kind of systemic thinking. So I see today as really this incredible culmination of lessons and insights that we really need to take forward, and really thank Ani for his broad strategic framing, which he also helped with when he launched this initiative at COP Dubai some years ago. And we actually launched this thinking even earlier, hosting the first sort of systemic convening on green accountability, on transparency, participation, accountability in climate finance at Chatham House about 3 years ago when this vision was first being birthed. And things have come such a long way. I think I'd like to sort of continue to push us on that systemic framing, especially in the current context, because a lot has changed since we started visioning this work. And I think there's several elements in which transparency, participation, accountability make a systemic difference. So one is the social acceptability of climate finance. We're seeing this as a challenge the world over as public finance becomes more and more scarce, especially international public finance. There's a question, is this a development climate trade-off? I think people need to be socialized at scale to understand the dividends they receive and the stake they hold in the value of effective climate finance. Second is delivery quality. So much of the delivery is highly localized, whether it's the preservation of critical carbon sinks like forests or peats, or whether it is ensuring energy infrastructure is designed well. Local feedback matters. It improves the delivery quality of what's done. So you need that architecture. We want climate finance to match the lived experience and needs of local people. They bring great intelligence into what's happening. And then lastly, it's an investment issue. Investment viability is improved by TAP. Investments are better when there is stakeholder buying. Investments are better in critical sectors when they are socially de-risked. The social risks and political risks of investment are a huge reason the costs of capital are so high in the global south, often 10x for the analogous investment in the global north. And so a lot can be done to do that social de-risking upstream beyond just buying insurance for the risk. It's engaging people, it's building stakeholders, it's addressing those needs. So whether it's carbon markets and the risk of greenwash carbon projects that aren't actually manifesting on the ground, to energy infrastructure that's not meeting up local needs, or using land and local resources in a way that causes social disruption, I think there's a lot we can do. There's a public-private civic ecosystem that needs to be built. We talk about a lot about public-private partnerships. We forget this civic infrastructure. And I think we heard our colleague for Senegal talk about feedback and listening. But today we need at-scale feedback and listening. We need digital systems as part of our digital public infrastructure. We need the analog social infrastructure to reach the last mile communities. And we need to build that critical trust. Today there's a trust epidemic. 60% of people, according to the Edelman Trust Barometers, have lost faith in government and the private sector. So there's a need to restore trust, and especially in this kind of finance that brings together these actors. So the civic piece is critical. And I think, Jesse, the kind of work that World Resource Institute, Huayru Commission, South-South-North, and the many implementing partners did under the Green Accountability showed that you need to build this connective tissue and this connective architecture. It's not enough just to have these projectized investments. So how do you build systems? And in the last 2 years, you and many of the team members started to build systems. And I think that's the key insight here. So whether it was the stakeholder mechanisms under the Just Energy Transition Program or the National Mangrove Restoration Strategy of Senegal, whether it was using Freedom of Information Act existing laws about transparency to actually get information to local indigenous communities in Brazil who could then influence allocated budget money that would not have reached them and be programmed. To Bangladesh, looking at the most local government units, the union parishads, and ensuring they were developing a systematic mechanism to plan and influence investment in climate at that local level. So we need to build systems. So, at the end of the day, I think this is a very powerful report. I think that one of the key insights it points out is where in the cycle we come in. It's not enough just upstream, and it's not enough just to consult. We need to build a deliberative architecture around climate finance and around development finance more broadly. But I think we really have an opportunity in the climate infrastructure. So very exciting session today. And we're so grateful for this conversation. And we at Civic intend to take this climate work forward. And I'm making a plea on behalf of the consortium of the Green Accountability work and us. We're calling out to donors. Let's continue to fund this. A lot of this work is breaking down. A lot of these great organizations are losing their funding. And this is a critical part of delivery, quality, and impact. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ali. I really, really appreciate that close. Incredibly strong, really bringing together. And you're absolutely right. It is about how we build, nurture, sustain these systems through the ups and downs of political turbulence. That is what's going to provide that social resilience that we need to for the long term for this work. So I wanted to thank all of our speakers once again, our presenters. Ali, Ani for the opening remarks, and thank you all of you for spending over an hour with us today. We really appreciate. You should be able to find in the chat all of the links for follow-up you will receive an email with the report and other links based on what was discussed here today. So thank you all. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day.